This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sayre.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. On today's show, we go to one of our favourite places in Dublin, Hodges Figgis Bookshop on Dawson Street, to interview Cathy Galvin on the launch of her new poetry collection, Ethnology, a love song for Connemara just published by Bloodaxe Press. And John F. Deane, the poet, was also at the launch to speak about Cathy's book and to read some of his own work from his new collection, Jonah and Me, published by Corconet. So we'll hear that first.
So first, here's Enda introducing the evening, and thanks to Stephen in Hodges Figgis for hosting our recording.
I'm going to host the whole night. It sounds very onerous, but I do want to say thank you very much to Stephen and Hodges Figgis because they're always so welcoming. And we had the pleasure of recording Cathy upstairs actually as well in a private room in Hodges Figgis, and Stephen was so kind at facilitating that as well. But just to say you're all really welcome. This is very exciting to be here for not one island, Achill Island with John F. Deane, but also the island of Mason Island in Connemara, and you'll be hearing about that soon from Cathy. So we're going west this evening. So the way we're going to do tonight is John F. Deane will read a few poems and from his beautiful book Jonah and Me. And actually I was just saying there that the two books really complement each other, don't they? The cover of this is done by the artist John Behan, and the beautiful cover is from Cathy's husband, isn't that right? Yeah, so they really complement each other. But John will read first, and then we will have Cathy and the launch of her book, so it's very exciting. And at the end, actually, if any of you want to ask any questions, Cathy and John have said that they will come up again and they will answer them, okay? But first to John F. Deane. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. I first encountered John F. when I sent him a manuscript called Eating Baby Jesus, and he wasn't turned off by the title, and he published it in the 1990s. But even before then, John F. Deane was really, I think, a great cultural and creative instigator. And we were just talking earlier there, because in 1978, it was actually this man sitting here, John F. Deane, who founded Poetry Ireland and Poetry Ireland Review. And it's great to see Claire Power here as well. She's the new director, would you like to wave your hand there, of Poetry Ireland. And the reason I'm saying that is because in May, Poetry Ireland, its new building is going to open. I think it's May the 7th, and it's been a long time coming, and it's going to be the most stunning building. So good luck to you, Claire. It's really exciting time for Poetry Ireland. But John F., he also founded Daedalus Press, which he ran from 1978 until 2006. He is importantly, I think, a poet of power, imagination, great spirit, and his poetic output has been vast, I think. He's a poet who's really interested in translation and the power of translation, and he himself has been translated into Polish and Norwegian. He's been the recipient of many awards, and he's also a member of Ethnology, which is the Irish affiliation of artists. What I like about John F. Deane is that he's a poet who isn't afraid to plummet the darkness. And we have another poet here, James Harper. Ireland is coming down with poets. I think Patrick Kavanagh said if you threw a stone, you're going to hit a poet on the head. But James is here as well. And in 2022, Irish Pages brought out Darkness Between Stars, which focused on questions of faith and poetry by John F. Deane and James Harper. And actually, it's really interesting, that book, because there's a kind of a dialogue goes on between the two of you in it, which came about through email and their writing processes. In 2023, he brought out his selected and new poems. So there is actually no stopping John F. He's a poet of profound imagination, as Rowan Williams says on the cover of it. He's a poet who walks a landscape where the spiritual and the material, they come together with, I think, a great lyrical quality and clarity. And it's really apparent, I think, that clarity in the title poem called Jonah and Me. And I was very lucky to go to the launch of this particular book, and it was great to hear John F. say, Yeah, I did wonder, he said, should I have called it Jonah and I and been grammatically correct? But no, he's going for Jonah and me. And I love this title poem, and I hope you might read it tonight, John F., because recently on Paddy's Day, a group of poets went to Patrick Kavanagh's bench on the canal. And Peter Sir, another poet here, he read Patrick Kavanagh's poem, Kerr's Ass. And it's about a donkey. And so it reminded me of your poem, John F. But we were all sitting at the bench and we heard the words from Patrick Kavanagh. We borrowed the loan of Kerr's ass to go to Dundalk with butter, brought him home the evening before the market, and exiled that night in mucker. And the end of the poem is, until a world comes to life, mourning the silent bog, and the god of imagination waking in a mucker fog. And I just thought, reading John F's brilliant poem, Jonah and Me, the god of imagination is most definitely waking there, with John F. and Jonah, his Bunnacurry mule, moving on the bog road together in what John F. says is a slow, uncomely, cosmic dance of bemused fellowship. That's wonderful, isn't it? A wonderful description. So we'll have John F. reading now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Enda. That was lovely. Good. Talking about Kerr's ass. It's how you say it. There is another story in the Bible about Balaam's ass. And it's a donkey. It's not the other thing. So one of the reasons I went with Jonah and Me was to avoid having to say Jonah's ass or something like that. Anyway, neither here nor there. The fact that in the 7th of May or thereabouts, Poetry Ireland will be opening the premises, to me is the culmination of a lifelong dream and ambition to have a focused poetry centre in Ireland, like the one in London, the London Poetry Society. So it's lovely to see you here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that door opening officially from by Catherine Connolly, I believe. I am here not to talk about John F. Deane, but I will read a few poems. I am here to be the amuse-bouche, the starter for Cathy on a banquet. So I have known Cathy for a number of years, and I think I have watched the development of this book with great interest and had my word or two in there to help her along. I think it's a magnificent book. It's the care that's in it, the research she's gone to, and especially for me, the open heart to taking formal risks in poetry. Above all, as the subtitle says, the love that sings aloud for Connemara. And I, being born on the west of Ireland, on an island, absolutely leap with joy at what she has done for the west of Ireland. My task is twofold. I'll read a few poems. But what I want to do with the poems I choose is to bring you to the west of Ireland and set you up, not from rain, but to where the sun always shines, and the islands of the west coast, to take you away from the suburbs out to the wild islands. So I hope we will do that. When you're on an island, there are great and huge presences all around you. My brother and I were very close. He was the wise one, the good one. I became a Jesuit priest and died in California. And I was the Blackstone in the family, the bad one, the brunt, the wicked one. But I enjoyed myself more than he did. I do remember a particular day on a lake on Achill Island, which is called Loch Ninian, which can be interpreted two ways, loch, the lake of the Deane, little birds, but it also can mean the lake of the sweet singing birds. And I prefer the second one. We had a homemade boat, which was very dangerous, which we called the Half Safe. We made it ourselves, and we were able to row it out on this lake, which is a big bog lake. With, if you sank, you'd probably come out in Australia. It went down so deep. But this was a particular moment that I will never forget. We were young, and I call it the unheard music. And then, in our sleeky, homemade boat out on the lake, we both fell silent. The oars lifted and dripping water on the surface, softly. Something incomprehensible holding us. Fragrance breathing from the heathers, the low hills embracing, and lake water tapping gently against the timber bones of the craft. We drifted, a long, sustaining moment in unannounced communion, as childhood drew nearer to the rough rock shores, and our leaning bodies grew firmer towards the tasks ahead, until we rowed again, oars raking against the rowlocks, silence persisting deep within us, swelling to a form of praise. And I will read, if that's okay, Jonah and me. Jonah and I is grammatically correct, but we had our own language in Bunacurry Achill, County Mayo. And we would never think of saying Jonah and I. We would say Jonah and me. And Jonah and me is more down to earth. It'd be great if I could find it. It'd be a great help. 74. Jonah was a man after my own heart. God called him as a prophet to go to Nineveh and tell them that they were all bad lads, and if they didn't behave themselves, he would obliterate them with the latest form of bombs that they had. And Jonah said, no, I don't want to do that. So instead of going east to Nineveh, he went west, as you probably know, and took a boat to sea. But God caught him, and they threw him into the sea, and he was swallowed by a whale, and the whale vomited him back on the shore. So he said, oh, feck, I better go and do the job. So he went to Nineveh. Jonah and me. I was reading in the big book, the Bible, of Balaam's donkey, of Elisha and Naaman, the leper cured, and about gratitude. And I thought of Jonah, my Bunacurry mule, big and raw, stubborn in hardship and unwilling, insistent in calling out from his knowledge of the world, wise in his own way as Solomon. We stood together, wearied, out on the wide spaces of the bogland, honey scent of heather on the breeze, in a quietude that could be prayer. The high dome of the sky was a mystic blue, and somewhere in the low growth of rush and scraw, a pipit sang. Beyond the ridge of the low hills, the Atlantic Ocean sounded, its soft, regular shushing of the breakers like a beautiful hymn of praise. It was as if we were standing lone in the first church, we, the first worshippers, awed and wordless. I had filled the Sally creels on either side of Jonah, from the footings dried in the sun, where the peat-thickened water wallowed dark from the deep veins of earth. And we started back, Jonah and me, good companions. The bog road was rough with stone and sorrow, and we, Jonah and me, moved in a slow, uncomely, cosmic dance of bemused fellowship. We stopped. I took 2 sods from either creel and carried them to ease his load, thanking him and flinging away my stick. Kindly, I laid my hand on the unshaven and twitching rump and sensed the stone-like bones of his spine. Then we carried on, Jonah and me, towards our Nineveh. And thank you, and I will hand over back to
Ethnology. Smelling of earth and ethanol, the scholar with soft leather gloves lifted my head from a box lined with velvet, unpacked my skull on a polished desk, took the measure of me, this other species, when are bones no longer our own, could not bring himself to touch the shreds of flesh on my nose. I had waited for the moon to rise over rocks where I searched for seals, their singing making me pause. At Trinity, wait for letters written to the provost that may yet bring me home to turf, stones, lines of tourists. When there was flesh on my childhood, I walked the cow road to the cliff edge, lifted blue eggs where they rested on the ground, warm in my hands, placed them in a box as treasure, knowing they were where they would not crack into flight.
And that was poet Cathy Galvin reading the title poem of her debut collection, Ethnology, a love song for Connemara, beautiful title, just published by Bloodaxe Press, with a lovely cover by Richard Charland, who I believe is Cathy's husband, of the quay on Mason Island in Connemara. And more about that island soon, but just a few words about Cathy. Previously, Cathy has published 3 pamphlets of poetry. She's been nominated for a number of awards, including the Ilkley Poetry Prize and the Listowel Poetry Collection Prize. She also edited Red, an anthology of new writing published by Waterstones. Cathy is also a journalist. She's worked as a senior editor for Newsweek and the Sunday Times. She has roots in Coventry and Connemara, and she now lives near Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. And I have to confess that this is the very first time that Peter and I have met Cathy, but we have encountered her poetry in the best way possible as readers. And I think that's really important. Also, just to say, it's wonderful to be here in Hodges Figgis. We are perched above the city. The sun is coming out and it's a lovely afternoon here. But what do we discover between the covers of this new collection of poems? Well, I think Ethnology is a fascinating book by a real poet who embraces the precision of language while also digging deep into the music of memory, loss and ultimately love. And the collection is split into 4 sections. There's Specimens, there's Mother, Love Songs of Connacht, concluding with Son, a crescendo of keening for her beloved son Connor. Cathy has crossed the waters today to launch this book, as I said, in Hodges Figgis, and we're very lucky to be with you here, Cathy. So welcome to Dublin.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was great to hear you read that title poem, Ethnology, and we might go back and talk about that soon, but just curious to talk about your relationship with Mason Island in Connemara. I mean, obviously it's this kind of powerful place that's celebrated throughout this collection, and I don't know, maybe people aren't kind of familiar with it, but the book begins with a title deed that's signed in 1902 by your great grandfather Pat John Connolly, who built a cottage on Mason Island. And you yourself were raised in England by an Irish-speaking mother from the island, and you were often ferried there by...
I went there with my grandmother and with my uncle. So of all the children born, in that place, only one remained, my Uncle Michael. But yes, it was extraordinary as a child, going from industrial Coventry, to this place, which I'm sure sometimes people don't believe I've witnessed how they were living. No running water, no electricity. My Uncle Michael's still living, off very little, fishing. that way of life that had survived for so long. So the family grew up on a mile over the water on the mainland in Rashina Mania, which is just outside Karna. But Mason Island it's only a mile long and a quarter of a mile wide. It is absolutely tiny. And I guess post-famine, and as a result of the Congested Districts Board public funding, 15 families built homes there. There were a few Connollys, but yes, my great grandfather, Patrick, who was census described as illiterate, raised his children there. So my grandmother grew up there, and she eventually inherited the cottage. They had cattle on the island, so all the children would go over there and spend time there. And eventually, in a complicated way, it came to me. And there it still stands, no roof. The gable end's still there, but nobody lives there.
This is very much part of the Connemara Gaeltacht. So this was everybody would have been Irish speaking on the island.
And that was another resonance. And it's quite interesting poetically, isn't it, to think about what we hear that we don't understand as children. I mean, some of us will also have grown up hearing the Latin Mass. And so languages that I didn't understand were a kind of oral landscape. That's always fascinated me.
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to ask you about that because that sensation of being an outsider, as you say, coming over from Coventry and then going on the Curragh, I mean, it just sounds so romantic. No wonder you became a poet. But you describe the language that you can't really understand it, but you passionately want to. And one of the poems, Women Come to Find Me, you say, as a child, I saw an orange sky that owned me. I am here to learn if they will let me. And reading it, I felt like you're a poet. You're really hungry for the Irish language. I'm thinking of a poem like the Ucrasarum, I'm hungry, whereas a young girl, you were sent to the shop. And the poem is kind of amusing in a way because you're given phonetic instructions as to how to ask for bread or rawn, or how to say, how are you, Céin Chuaigh Will to. And then you conclude 50 years on, the shop has gone, and though I can spell Céin Chuaigh Will to agus a rán, I can taste none of it. So I was just wondering, did you yourself learn Irish as the years went on? And also, what did you mean by you can taste none of it? Do you think it's a time that's kind of been erased and it's gone? Is that it? But the language is still quite firmly, you can still hear it in that part of the country. I was just wondering, when you say you can't taste it, what did you mean by that?
There's a lot there, really perceptive to pick up on the orange sunset. Yeah. Because that, I cannot describe why, but that caught me really, really young and has haunted me ever since. I just think sublime beauty of the place got me. The sense of loss and poverty also got me. In terms of the language, I was absolutely terrified of it. I was aware of this language that sounded so beautiful, and also when I stayed with my grandparents, we would be in a 3-room cottage. So I'd be put to bed, and then I could hear the adults over the kind of partition wall jabbering away in Irish and laughing a lot. And it just sounded A, great fun, and B, alien, and C, beautiful, because there's a softness to it. And I was just aware, I was told, well, the Irish you're hearing is not what our grandparents spoke. That's a different kind of Irish. That was even more wonderful. And so my mother died when I was 11, and literally that was the loss of a mother and a mother tongue. So there wasn't a sense growing up in Coventry that she wanted to pass this on in any way. It was something, it was a little bit gossipy with her sisters, but you have to remember what England was like at that. We're talking about the 1960s and 70s, IRA activity. You had to be very careful. And so coming to the language has actually been really recent. It was in COVID I started to learn online with the Manchester Irish Language Group. I am ashamed to say that I've been learning it for about 4 or 5 years, and I am appalling. And I think it's because I'm older. Frankly, if I'd learnt it young, it would have stuck. But the one thing that I'm grateful for that's changed is I'm not frightened anymore. I'm not terrified anymore. And I will go back to it. I will definitely go back to it and just try and improve.
Well done. Well, I mean, there's people in Ireland who've been, studying Irish since primary school and they still can't speak it fluently. So well done for going at it. But as a child, you did hear your mother speak it in the house, or when
with my aunts, or when we went to Ireland, which wasn't that frequent.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah.
It's a striking title. I mean, the collection is called Ethnology, and obviously the title poem is that. And you're kind of passionate about reclaiming the lives of the islanders from, if you like, the kind of callous lens of 19th century anthropological reports that viewed local people as representative specimens. I'm thinking, like you also ask in that poem, when are bones no longer our own? And you're referring to the human remains that were stolen in 1890 from burial grounds in Inishbofin and elsewhere in the west of Ireland. And they were housed in Trinity College, just literally a stone's throw from where we're sitting now, as part of their anthropological collection. So can you fill us in on that background a bit?
Yeah, I think just to explain a little, you mentioned that the book is in 4 parts. This has taken a long time to write. I think what started as trying to reconnect with my mother and with that lost mother tongue, over time became something else. So quite coincidentally, well, 2 things. As well as the anthropologists whose work I was fascinated by, there were other 19th century figures like J.M. Singh and Douglas Hyde and others who I was reading to try and get a sense of their perspective on how people were living, in that part of the world. And there's an image in Singh that comes up in Playboy of the Western World, where one of the characters talks about the skulls that are lined up like jugs on a Connacht dresser. That isn't the exact quote, but that's the idea. And there's a joke in there because the character saying it is essentially saying they've put our skulls in Trinity because we're so great. It is exactly the opposite reason, really, that those skulls are there. But these images from Singh started to sort of become present. I'm just going to read one other image from Singh, and it's from his brilliant reportage from the Aran Islands. It's very striking. When a number of blackened boards and pieces of bone had been thrown up with the clay, a skull was lifted out and placed upon a gravestone. Immediately, the old woman took it up in her hands and carried it away by herself. Then she sat down and put it in her lap. It was the skull of her mother, and began keening over it with the wildest lamentations. So I think I was conscious in embarking on this, and it took me a long time to give myself permission, that I was in effect digging up the bones of my own mother, that I was trying to tackle something as visceral as that and didn't really know where to begin. And in the process of this, which took some time, I became aware of the Haddon-Dixon Repatriation Project, which was essentially a campaign to have skulls that had been taken from Western burial grounds repatriated, that had been stored in the Old Anatomy Museum of Trinity College, Dublin, just across the road here. How I found myself there, I really almost don't know, but that's another story and it would take too long. But that process of physically being there and it was only a few years ago, while people from those communities were asking to bury these skulls, was quite profound, and it lent itself to that title poem and to the collection. But there has been this process of reclamation and digging, and
a bit like Seamus Heaney,
who appears but in another form.
So it's been a journey. Your love song to Connemara in the second section, you were just reading the bit there from J.N. Singh. I thought it's very intensified with your use of language, which is pared back, dreamlike. In Water's Break, one of your poems, you say, "Put on the island as a dress, and when you wake, put on a coat of fathoms. What does the water want?" So I wanted to ask you about the fact that you are an experienced journalist and editor, and you were speaking there about it took a long time for the book to come about. Was it hard to switch, because you did a lot of research for this book as well, because it comes with notes at the back, thankfully, for if anybody wants to find out who Douglas Hyde or Douglas Fahija was, for instance, or J.M. Singh, you can definitely find out at the back. But research, as we all know, isn't poetry. And I was just wondering, was it hard to switch from a particular mindset and type of journalistic writing, which you were used to the more lyrical, pared back writing of poems displayed in the book? And also, I suppose, terrible one for asking not one but two questions, but were you always, as a journalist, writing poems on the side as well? You know, because it's so completely different, isn't it, as a way of writing?
So the quick answer is no, I wasn't. I'd always loved poetry and always loved literature and wrote, you know, like many of us, you know, wrote poetry young. But that sense that you could make some kind of journey into it and it would be supported, absolutely not there. And I really felt a vocation to be a journalist. Again, I was told that wasn't possible, but it turned out I got there in the end. And so that love appeared in strange ways later. It started, I set up a short story prize for the Sunday Times. That kind of morphed into setting up a short story organisation. And all the time I was facilitating people and loving it. But it took a while for me to think, well, maybe I could write something. So I did an MA in creative writing at Warwick, which took me back to Coventry, and thought I've got to stop my journalistic way of thinking. I thought that I wanted to write a kind of creative non-fiction book about South Connemara, about Mason Island. And nothing was right. So it's literally taken writing memoir, writing short stories, and then starting to write poetry. And that began at Warwick, to my surprise. It's just started to happen.
It surprised you. Poems also surprise poets. I think they can appear when you least expect them to. But I suppose there's no right or wrong time to become a poet, you know. So, and it is a journey. It's an act of discovery. So that's interesting to hear. But Cathy, you're going to read a poem now, a second poem, and it's from the third section. Oh, am I correct about this? Yeah, I think I am. Third section of the book, and it's a part called Mythology. And the poem is called Choosing What to Say to Dr. Hyde. And of course, you're referring there to Douglas Fahija or Douglas Hyde there.
Love songs of Connacht. So I think I owe these 19th century figures a huge amount. I've got to, almost in my imagination, in part, I mean, I haven't studied them over and over and over, but they've become like friends, because for all that I might be annoyed by certain perspectives, I've learnt a lot as well. So Hyde's Love Songs of Connacht is among the many folkloric books he put together. He called this particular book Poetry, which I really liked, and it was the stories of women. And there are many dialogues in this book, and this is a dialogue with him. And I've kind of retranslated he's translated fragments in Love Songs of Connacht, and I've retranslated something. And a little like the skull speaking, this is a young woman speaking back to him.
So we're going to hear this now. I can't wait for this.
Choosing what to say to Dr. Hyde. I will tell him about fire, lying black as burned coal, and he will say, no, not black like that, black as slow. Tell of being held high to pick blossom from the furthest tree, black souls on a whitened floor, the way one boy could dance me. I will say his laugh was a note that dropped splintering into ice, a spread-webbed, white-blue, black bruising, over peat crushed by boots on a cottage floor, like the morning of my forced wedding. I will tell him my story, this stranger, this old man, this song collector. I will tell him, and he will never know how I burned for one boy's beauty, how the river flowed and roared at his coming, at the fury of his kissing. And this man will write, love is the colour of blackberries, and the colour of a raspberry on a fine sunny day. Not that my tongue still tastes him now he has gone. To the west this old man should not have come. The stone is sharp, the lichen cold.
Thanks, Cathy, for reading that. Also, I mean, the third section of the book, I mean, it pays homage not just to Douglas Fahija, but also to impressive literary characters who are, if you like, in integral to the cultural life of the west of Ireland. I'm thinking of the cartographer, scholar, writer, Tim Robinson, the poet, Richard Murphy, the sean-nós singer, Joseph O'Haney, and you've mentioned Sing. So I'm just wondering, I mean, did you enjoy writing those poems and kind of tapping into that great array of Western-oriented talent?
Enjoyed, yes, definitely. And I felt this business of not having permission, I think I probably overdid it. I felt I had to learn everything and do everything. But I did enjoy the process, and I did enjoy, it's that thing of coming slant at lots of things. It's not to tell a one-dimensional narrative, but to just try and see where that would leave me. So it certainly broadened out from trying to re-engage with my mother, but I'm glad for the time. I don't know quite what it is, but it's certainly taken a lifetime of thinking and probably well over 10 years of writing. And in that, there's plenty that I've put to one side that isn't in here. But yeah, I think I needed to have a conversation with lots of different people.
And also, imaginatively, I suppose, we actually knew Richard Murphy. He was an amazing poet, and it was nice to see the poem about Ted Hughes as well. And obviously Hughes and Sylvia Plath had visited him there famously, and Richard Murphy got the kick, and hence the title for his autobiography called The Kick. I don't know if did you read that, or did you?
Yes, I did. And the Ave Maria, which was one of Murphy's boats, is in the boatyard of somebody who I am distantly related to, and we stumbled on that, and that features in this poem because it was the carcass of the boat in effect.
Also, I liked the Tim Robinson poem, Onra, because you're bringing a personal slant to it, because you visited him in England and you left your umbrella behind in his home because he'd moved over there at that stage. And I think it's good when poems come in from the personal kind of angle, which I really enjoyed that poem, actually. But it's hard not to be moved by the final section of this book called Son, which is, as I said earlier, it's a poignant maternal cuinu or keening for your son Conor. And you made a heartbreaking journey across the waters to Mason Island, where you buried his heart in the place he loved. And language begins to show its inadequacies, I think, in the aftermath of this loss. All that lies within the language I cannot speak. There's new life, there's growing old. Tell me if you know how to live, to love, to return. So we would love if you would read the final poem now for us. It was lovely to hear you read so far. You're going to read from the section after, and maybe you might talk us into it, Cathy.
I will. I mean, this is difficult, and I think it must be very... It was a difficult experience, but it must be very difficult to read also. So Conor, my son, died when he was 29. He had a heart condition. He'd loved the island. And yes, there had to be an autopsy in which his body was buried in London. But I asked for his heart to bury it on the island. And I have to say, there are a couple of poems at the beginning of this section, well, only one actually, that was written sometime before. The rest kind of came in a flood. And of all those conversations I have had with all these people in the book, this one is not a conversation. I think it's the truest voice. I can't know what the reader will think. And so, this is a long section called After, and I won't read it all. I'll just read a bit of it. The third section. I became a mountain young. I feel where the sun flies along the valley, casting shapes, then is gone. Rivers, streams, clitter, rushing bone-scored glaciers, deeper than denial. Sometimes I sense the trees behind me, breathing. A child let go of a mother let go of a child. This is not a magical incantation. But what if he were not of this world, the red-haired man in the graveyard at Omi, the small man who disappeared? And what if all the birds we have seen, heron, robin, curlew, were really omens in flight? And what if these seas, under rich copper and gold, layerings of light, furling islands of aesthetes, speak of all we will one day understand. Wrapped in a cloak of calico, you are with the men of the sea, sure of your place. The kestrel took the young blackbird. I want mercy, not sacrifice. Small loaves of rock in my hands, thrown to the strand from the Laurentia Dalradian, with marble, quartzite, granite, limestone, clock Freyek. Carried back to the rest of your body, the London clay settling. The rest of you lies near a dustbin, near a path, near the homeless who sit near you smoking crack in the litter-blown cemetery. I lay these sanded, sea-washed loaves above. You a warrior beneath. Me a bearer, body, arms emptied. In the city before here, I looked out on the streets to birds, permit holder only parking, the property for sale board, to the tree I planted in leaf and will leave behind with words, births and headstones, and this moment, the orange sky above the boher, my mother barefoot with the bow, my son playing, Groma Krihu Awik.
Thank you so much, Cathy, for reading that. Congratulations as well to your wonderful debut collection, Ethnology, a love song to Connemara. And Peter and I have really journeyed with you through these poems. We've learned so much, most especially, and in your own words, about the umbilical cord of love, which is it's a lovely line. Thank you so much, Cathy, for coming today to Hodges and Figgis in Dublin, to the Breakfast Table. Books for Breakfast are delighted to have you here. And details of your book will be available on our website, www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. So thank you very much, Cathy Galvin.
Gormorgat. Oh, thank you.
Your Irish is it sounds like you're definitely getting there, Cathy. I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sir here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.